lifting up Jesus, opening his word from Australia, Denmark, Israel, Japan, New Zealand, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, Singapore, South Africa, United Kingdom, Thailand, the Philippines, United States, and throughout the world. You're watching Moriel TV.
Hi, this is Tim from Moriel TV and Moriel Radio, here with Jacob Prasch, live in Israel, actually, in the Old City. Jacob, one of our good brothers, Andy Harrison from Nottingham, had the question, hi, could you please ask Jacob to share his thoughts about global warming and climate change and the big push from governments around the world to engage in it? How does this tie in with the globalist agenda for one world government?
We always try to examine issues like this from a scriptural perspective. There's absolutely no question that when God created the earth and the biosphere, he put man in the garden and he told the man to tend it and take care of it. We are to be God's custodians of the environment. But like anything else, when man fell, the creation fell with it. The world is in the power of the wicked one. Now we see that there are natural disasters and there's natural pollution. There are planktons that are natural biological pollutants. There are toxic gases emitted volcanically that are natural pollutants. There are simply byproducts of ranching and farming that increase CO2 emissions that are not traditionally seen as being pollutants. They're simply the results of even organic farming. The world is dysfunctional. The planet is dysfunctional. We read about this in Romans chapter 8. It uses the birth pang metaphor so common in New Testament and Old Testament eschatology, but it tells us that, as it were, the creation itself is groaning out for the redemption. The creation itself is looking to be saved. We know that the whole creation groans in verse 22 of Romans 8 and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only this, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our own adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Notice it's something that affects both man and the biosphere, that are both cursed because of sin. The new creation is calling out for the return of Jesus, but so, as it were, was the actual biosphere that he created that has come under the curse of sin. So the idea that man can somehow redeem the environment is completely false. It's in the power of Satan. Only the Lord can do that. Now, this is not to justify pollution or anything of this nature. The book of Revelation tells us directly, let us destroy those who are destroying the earth. Whatever spiritual meanings we assign to that, it certainly would have an environmental meaning. We are not to destroy the biosphere that God has given us, even though it too is under the fall and under the curse of the fall. But let's begin trying to understand what's really happening now. What has happened since the 1960s is that one's position on social issues or environmental issues determines one's position on morality, but in a perverted way. Isaiah says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good. The mainstream media, most academic institutions, even many mainstream churches and denominations now, and synagogues will say, if you don't support same-sex marriage, you're not moral. It's a moral cause of human rights. There's people who will champion the cause of the so-called Palestinians, ignoring the fact that there's no such thing as an ethnic Palestinian. The Philistines disappeared centuries ago. We have is Palestinian Arabs, who are not the indigenous people of biblical Israel. We have people calling for boycotts of Israel. Oh, it's a moral cause, boycott Israel. Well, I'm in Israel at the moment. This is the only country in the Middle East where the Christian population is not disappearing, or at least under grave threat. Even in pro-Western Muslim countries, such as Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood is threatening the existence of even the Coptic Christians. Even in Jordan, there's persecution of Christians, although nothing like what happens in Saudi Arabia or Iran. Christianity in the broader sense is under threat of disappearing in Syria, in Iraq, and it has almost been annihilated multiple times in Lebanon and would have been destroyed had the Israelis not intervened on behalf of the Maronite Christians, who are Eastern Rite of the Roman Church, actually. Particularly, persecution is focused on evangelical Arabs. What happens to believers in the Gaza Strip at the hands of Hamas and so forth is unspeakable. The only place in the Middle East where the rights of Christians are protected is Israel, yet this is the one that some people and even some churches want to boycott, and they make that a moral cause. Well, what they do with homosexuality and what they do with hatred of Israel, ignoring the fact that the Jews are the indigenous people, what they do with these issues is what they do with the environment. It becomes a somehow moral litmus test. If you don't agree with global warming, you're immoral. You're irrational. Now, these same people who are saying this and talking about human rights, well, obviously they're hypocrites. They'll say nothing of the fact that what happens to women and homosexuals in Muslim countries is absolutely unspeakable. And that they had Palestinian rights activists at these women's marches and protests and things like this, turning their back on the plight of women in Muslim countries here in the Middle East. Well, it's the same with the environment. They make it an artificial litmus test of morality. Where do you stand on homosexuality and same-sex marriage? You know, where do you stand on boycotting Israel? Where do you stand on global warming? It becomes a moral litmus test that is absolutely a test filled with false positives. It's based on certain presuppositions. While we can say that corporations and industries have vested interests in hiring scientists who will interpret the data in favor of those industries so they can continue making money at the expense of the environment, people overlook the fact that the opposite is also true. We have seen all kinds of fudged research, botched research, papers not submitted to peer review, things that have come out of the University of Norwich, England, and elsewhere, things that have come out of the UN that are debunked and are nonsense. I point to the book by the Hollywood author and physician Michael Crichton dealing with this issue. Again, he's not writing from any kind of a Christian perspective. He's just writing objectively based on the scientific evidence that exists. Well, let's look at this evidence for global warming now. Why did the Vikings call Iceland when it's mostly green, and why do they call Greenland when it's mostly ice? Obviously, there are fundamental changes in weather patterns that take place meteorologically in a natural cycle along the lines of the way El Nino does. Weather scientists, meteorologists don't really understand this, and it's only been in the last 3 decades or so they've gained any real momentum in understanding it in depth. There are weather cycles that are not simply annual, but run in 7-year patterns or longer. Obviously, at one point, Greenland was green and Iceland was ice. It changed. There is substantial evidence to suggest that there are patterns of global warming and global freezing that follow a natural meteorological pattern, of which man is only a minor player to the degree he's a player at all. But the evidence for global warming becomes very problematic with greenhouse gases. Remember, carbon dioxide is to plants and to trees what oxygen is to us. You cut off our oxygen supply, we die. You cut off CO2 to the jungles, they die. Yet we're calling what they breathe a pollutant. They're a fundamental problem with this. The scientific community is divided against itself. Now, when we look in the book of Revelation, there will be environmental catastrophes. These commence in the book of Revelation, chapter 8, following the rapture. When God begins to unleash his own judgments against the kingdom of Antichrist, that is Haronya in Hebrew, the wrath of the Lord, the Orge, what happens during that period known as the day of the Lord following the rapture. It begins in Revelation chapter 8 with a series of environmental judgments that are unleashed by God, What you're seeing today is a preparation for the coming of the Antichrist, where the Antichrist is going to try to counterfeit the millennial reign of Jesus and be able to deal with man's problems. He's going to have a false solution to the threat of the conflict between the Islamic world and the Western world. He's going to bring a false peace to the Middle East, and he's going to bring a false economic stability and prosperity. At least he will initially seem to. He will promise that. But of course, people will find out they've been double-crossed, and the Jews particularly will find out they've been betrayed. Well, he's also going to try to claim to be able to have some kind of a capacity to bring an environmental restoration through radical green programs or however he is going to do it, but it's not going to happen. Now, we have to understand in demonic religions that are idolatrous, such as Hinduism, you have the Mother Earth theosophy as the basis to them. That the earth itself, the geo, is worshipped as a divine entity or as a deity of some kind. This is central to much of Eastern religious thought. It is also central to Wicca and witchcraft. Not witchcraft in the sense of the direct worship of Satan, but witchcraft in the sense that most witches become involved with it. That is paganism. It's simply paganism. It is nature worship. The pagan religions of the Druids, the original religions of the British Isles, again, it's centered around nature worship and natural meteorological cycles together with astronomical phenomena and normal celestial cycles. This kind of idea is ancient. These things are all ancient. All ancient. When we look at it from a biblical perspective, let's put this together. One, no matter what man does, the environment is going to be polluted because it's part of the fall. That's not to say we should contribute to it, but it is to say it's under the curse of the fall, and man cannot redeem it or prevent it from happening. Two, there is scientific evidence for natural meteorological cycles. Three, the environmentalist agenda embraced by the Green parties has common ground with Eastern religion and New Age philosophy of earth worship, of nature worship, of worshiping the creation instead of the creator, as we're warned about in the book of Romans. Fourth, which is of course demonic, even satanic in origin. Fourth, we see that it has become a false test, a false litmus test for morality, much the same as homosexuality is and Israel is and other issues are. If you don't agree with it, you're not a moral person. Now, these same people who try to make these issues the moral standards ignore other things. This is a broad problem we see transpiring in the Western world. For instance, the attempt of the organized left to make support of the policies of the Obama administration, not only on the environment, but on income equality and things like this. They seek to make it a social justice issue and a morality issue, ignoring the fact that the breakdown of the family in 3/4 of the Afro-American children born in the United States, very nearly 3/4, are born out of holy wedlock, and how that has not only contributed to, but directly triggered the permanent underclass that Afro-Americans have largely remained, something that Senator Patrick Moynihan, himself a liberal Kennedy Democrat in the 1960s, warned was beginning to happen even then, and warned of its longer-term consequences. Yet, you've got to blame income inequality instead of the fact that 3 out of 4 black kids don't have a father who supports them, that food stamps and the government's the welfare check. Well, you've got to blame the environment, on capitalism. This is crazy. When you look at socialist economies, when you look at what the Soviet Union did, they made the Aral Sea disappear. If you look at the standards of environmental health in China, in communist China, I was just there a few weeks ago, you would not believe the pollution in Canton, in Guangzhou, in Chongqing. You wouldn't believe the pollution. What happened in Eastern Europe, the industries of Poland and East Germany and so forth, it was unbelievable under the communists. So they tried to push this somehow socialist agenda to save the environment, when in fact socialism and communism have raped the environment far more than capitalism, where at least the market economies allowed class action suits. The whole thing is corrupt. The whole thing is stupid. The whole thing is nonsense. But the world has always been corrupt and convoluted. What we need to look at is this. Romans chapter 8, the creation groans out. What we have to look at is the book of Revelation. Let us destroy those who are destroying the earth. You want to destroy the earth? Now God's going to destroy the earth. But don't subscribe to this artificial litmus test. Pollution is wrong. We should keep our eye on the correct ball. Pollution is wrong. This idea of global warming, there is fudge data on both sides, and the experts don't really know. Oxygen is not something humans can live without, and CO2 is not something that plants and trees can live without. Now understand this. Let's understand the nature of the fall. In biology, when something is being oxidized, something else is being reduced. In order for our bodies, as humans even, to make energy, we need something called adenine triphosphate, ATP. Adenine triphosphate reacted in the Krebs cycle, which is the citric acid cycle, an 8-stage biological process, biochemical process, yields adenine diphosphate plus energy plus inorganic phosphate. It requires oxygen. To turn carbon into energy, food, we need oxygen. But when something's being oxidized, something else will be reduced. In other words, eating will kill you, but not eating will kill you faster. Breathing is lethal. Breathing will kill you. Not breathing will kill you faster. Why is it like that? It's like that because of bioentropy. Why is there bioentropy? Because of sin, because man is fallen. Well, what is true of humans and human organisms is true of the planet. Pollution is endemic. It cannot be stopped, and it's going to become worse. Man can contribute to it, but God is going to unleash environmental judgments after the rapture. We need to understand the environmental issues from a scriptural perspective. And we need to understand, as with anything else, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, and Satan, working through the spirit of Antichrist, is setting the stage for the coming of the Antichrist. And I have no doubt that this false litmus test of global warming, as with many other issues, social justice issues, so-called, are in large measure his vehicles for doing it. Now, this was a complicated question, and unfortunately it required a complicated answer. I hope I didn't lose anybody. I tried to make it as concise and understandable as I can, and perhaps I've not made the best job of it. But essentially, you can't save the planet anyway. That does not mean we shouldn't try to preserve it. That does not mean we should contribute to its destruction, but it does mean that we can't save it. It's under the curse of the fall. Jesus has to come. Romans chapter 8. That is the only ultimate hope for the environment. This whole green agenda is aligned with New Age theosophy and the spirit of Antichrist. That is what is really happening. Thank you for your question. My name is Jacob Prasch. God bless.
Blessings, dear friends. Greetings in Jesus. This is your friend Jacob Prasch speaking to you at the moment from the UK. You know, so many of the questions we get in our Roku broadcasts and our Vimeo clips and on YouTube deal with subjects that we deal with much more extensively in our books. We can't, for the sake of brevity, go into the kind of depth in a TV broadcast we can actually go into in a book. But so many of the questions come from material that are expounded in the books on a much more broader scale that it's almost frustrating sometimes that we can't spend hours and hours answering the questions that are given to us. Obviously, practicality dictates that's not a possibility. The books are there. They're available. They're available in print through the Moriel catalog on the Moriel website, moriel.org. But in this day of Kindle and electronic books, they're also available through Amazon, and they're available through Kindle. The three books that would be the most referred to in the questions we receive are the three latest books. The first being The Dilemma of Laodicea. The Dilemma of Laodicea. It's an exposition of the seven churches in Revelation, culminating with the final two churches, Philadelphia and Laodicea particularly, setting the stage for the return of Jesus. The Dilemma of Laodicea would be the first. The second would be Shadows of the Beast. Shadows of the Beast. How the coming Antichrist, how his identity will be revealed to the faithful church. The rapture will not happen. Will not happen, absolutely not happen, until the faithful church knows who the ultimate beast of Revelation is. That is the Antichrist and also the false prophet. How the identity of the coming Antichrist will be revealed to the faithful church. Shadows of the Beast, the second book. And the final and latest one, Harpazo. Harpazo. What the scripture actually teaches about the rapture, the snatching away which takes place between the sixth and seventh seals in the book of Revelation. So these three books, The Dilemma of Laodicea, Shadows of the Beast, and Harpazo, all available on the Moriel catalog, all available through Amazon, and all easily available electronically by Kindle. Thank you so much, dear friends. God bless. May Jesus be with you.